cross. People see the cross as something terrible. It was terrible. It brings us into a place, Gethsemane, that it declares not my will. They were born to do a divine plan, that which unfolds concerning the people. We cross our hearts and we to do what you do. What do you do? What is your gift and your calling? You can only find that out from God. If we come back, You know, I left last night with the conversation with Dr. Bobby, and we were talking about a united nation and how God has given America a vision. And in that understanding is why we make the comment, the vision has been given. Why do we choose? For a long time that when I had my experience in the military, I always try to say that I believe that whenever we have a true global leadership alliance, then there must be a need, especially the military. So I'm going to talk about the military because that's my experience, that's my life. And I was converted into the military, and I literally lived out a spirit-filled life all of my senior years in the military. And I come to realize that I believe that more than ever, we need an enlisted advisory council all the way to the presidential level. And the reason I say that is because I noticed that when we got to the level of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, then you did not see the Sergeant Major. People have to realize that whenever you start talking about a command sergeant major, you're talking about an expertise that's absolutely excellent. It's broad in its understanding and in its scope, and their heart is always purpose before pleasure. Let me say it again. Whenever you get a true military leader that aspires to bring excellence in every way, and one of the things that I always have known in my heart as a first sergeant, as a commander, as a command sergeant major, my whole job was to make the commander great. This is really the establishment of America. People don't realize that America is a militarily legal established nation. Now, in order for that to work, it had to work as an upside down kingdom. And that's what we're coming into now, because whenever I went in the military, one of the things that we always learn as an enlisted person, it was mission, men, and self. It was selfless service. In other words, whatever we did because we were concerned about the mission while we're doing it. We were concerned about the men or the women who was going to bring it to pass, and we became last whenever it came to serving. I remember when I was in training once and it was raining, and I think I was in Fort Bragg in the field, and it was raining, and we had an air assault move, and we went there, and it was raining so hard, and we got our breakfast, and when they served the breakfast, it literally got wet and turned the eggs green. And I remember that because I always made sure that the people got fed before me. So when you start talking about leadership, leadership is those that know how to lead, and they lead by knowing what the purpose is, what the mission is, and caring for the people because it's mission, men, and self. Now, why I say there need to be an advisory board all the way to the presidential level. One is because when you get to the Secretary of Defense, they don't have a sergeant major with them. When you get to the vice president, they don't have a command sergeant major with them. When you get to the presidency level, he doesn't have a command sergeant major. Even though there is a sergeant major in the Army, the Navy, all the way up. But the truth of the matter is they really need to be behind the table. They need to be at the table of the conversation. Now, a true command sergeant major know that he is there to listen, to see, and speak in an advisory capacity after they leave the meeting. In other words, his conversation at the meeting is when he's asked by the commander, what's your take on this? So when you start talking about an enlisted advisory council, you're talking about the one that have had the experience, that know how to function, that have been through that in training, and now he's able to give conversation to the commander. And what I really love is that I want to express my appreciation for some people as I go on, because they allowed me to function the way that I was trained, the way that I was taught, and they allowed me to implement it, and we became excellent as a unit. So when we see that, we understand that true leadership is a command voice. In other words, when you talk about a command voice, it actually speaks in a tone that it brings about a esprit de corps. Now you have to understand esprit de corps is a motivation for people to work together to bring to pass one mission, and they do it as a team. So when you see that, we must know how it functions. Whenever we did physical training in the morning, everybody thought it was for physical exercise. And it was, but it was for more than that. And that's why we did it in the morning. It's because in the morning when you get up, you're drowsy, you get in the shower, you get dressed, you put on your uniform, you go out. And when I went in the military, reveille was at 5 o'clock in the morning. So at 5 o'clock in the morning, you really didn't feel like running, but what it did, it prepared you for the rest of the day. We got up and we actually did physical training. We did the exercise, and we always culminated with a run, a joint run, where we ran together in formation. That was a reason. Because if we learn to do exercise together, run together, then we really begin to grow into an understanding of who is strong, and we actually exercise to the lowest level. And I was always a cadence caller because I was good at running. I was good at physical exercise. So I was always the cadence caller. I love to do that because I could sing cadence on the outside of the formation, and I would get fresh air, and we would run, and I would always be singing, and I was always the one that brought them home. What did that mean? That mean I had enough energy to finish. When everybody else was tired, then I had the energy to be able to sing them home. Here we go, all the way, Airborne, airborne, airborne. So I was able to do that, and I would do that in such an exciting way that everybody would finish and they said, thank you for helping me get to the end. So there is an understanding that commanding officers actually establishes the strategy, but the non-commissioned officer corps is the one that motivates the people to bring it to pass. It's important that going forward as this new nation, we learn to bring this thing together in a balance. We need the commissioned officer and the non-commissioned officer. And when we begin to see that, you're going to understand that with motivation, we do that on the enlisted side of the house. Now, one of the things that happened is that people began to understand, they thought they were their own person. But when you're in a unit, you need to understand that function together is what you need if you're going to war. Now, if you're going to war, you don't go to war as an individual. When you train as a unit, you don't train as an individual. You train as an individual so you can put into the corporate structure what you've learned. That's the reason every service has basic training. Because basic training says, in essence, all of you that enlisting are a commissioned officer, you're all infantry by design. What did that mean? That means if the balloon goes up, drop your typewriter, drop your computer, we got to go to war. So that was basic training, but after basic training, it was for discipline, so you would actually learn how to transition from a civilian to a military in the service that you were in. Once you were there, then they gave you individual training. They made you proficient in what you would do in the unit once you got there. So this was called advanced individual training. So once you passed that, then you were sent to the unit so you could function in the unit in the place where you was trained. Now the picture of that is also a picture that you'll find in the Bible. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 12. You'll see there's gifts, administration, and operation. So really, that comes together as a spiritual entity than a legal entity. That's what we got to learn going forward. Remember, I talked about the book, A Command Strategy. And when I talk about a command strategy, I talked about this book. But what I'm going to cause you to understand that I wrote a second book. This one was for the officer. And I wrote a second book, which was Command Voice. And this one was for the enlisted people. So I actually brought a balance of the command strategy with the non-commissioned understanding of how you come together and make your commander great. So when people really begin to see that the American military, the reason why they're strong is because they got commissioned officers and non-commissioned officers. And that's what I want to talk about as we go forward. It said the American military is the best trained in the world. We are. Command sergeant majors are the key to that. And you have to understand, I'm a retired command sergeant major, and I want to personally and publicly thank two commanders, specific. One is I want to thank my company commander in 1985, James C. Runyon, which was my company commander. And one of the things that he did for me, when he took over the unit, he literally called me into his office and he said to me, I want you to tell me what you're going to do in the next year. And I want you to write it down. And I was like, sir, do what? He says, I want you to write down what your purpose and what you're going to function and what you're going to bring to pass in another year. It had never happened to me before. I never had to write it down. So I turned around and says, sir, that's for officers. He says, it's in your job description. So I went to my job description. Why I'm bringing this up now, whatever you're doing in any job, your purpose is in your job description. Are you doing what your job description announces for you to do? The other one is my battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Milton Aura Menjivar, Lieutenant Colonel. So what they did, they literally gave me the ability to actually do my job based on my job description. And when we came to the end of the year, I had so many accomplishments that I could not even name them all in my evaluation report because I had never written them down. And this was the backdrop that caused me to be able to understand, going to Sergeant Major's Academy, how the military really functioned. I want to thank you all, sirs, because in their evaluation report, they put something in the comment section that I'd never even understood about myself. And the Colonel Menjivar says, unlimited potential. Now, you don't understand what that meant to somebody that was trying to find out their purpose. Unlimited potential. Then later on, after I became a sergeant major, and I was a sergeant major in the 5th and 9th Cavalry, Buffalo Soldier in Hawaii, the Lord said to me, he says, if you do not pursue sergeant major of the Army, I'll make you greater, much, much greater. So that's when I retired. And I want to thank Lieutenant General James Crossell, who really said, are you going to retire, Sergeant Major? I says, well, yes. He says, if you change your mind, call me. I said, sir, I will not change my mind. I graduated Sergeant Major's Academy in 1986 and was a Command Sergeant Major of the 5th and 9th Cavalry in Schofield Barracks, Hawaii in 1986 through 1989. Now, little did I know that I was literally handpicked for the job. I was qualified, but I did not realize that I was airborne. I was a master jumper. I was a pathfinder. I was jungle expert. I had all of these qualifications, and I didn't realize that God really had trained me to be an outstanding soldier, because what he was really training me is to be an outstanding apostle, because I was going to be trained. I remember coming in, and what caused me to come in the military was several things. One is George Washington's story that he could not lie to his father for cutting down the cherry tree. They laugh about that now, but that's one of the reasons why I said I'll follow this man. The other one was John Fitzgerald Kennedy. I was in the 11th grade when he was assassinated. And one of his speeches, he says, ask not what your country can do for you, but what can you do for your country? So I heard the call of what could I do for my country. So those two things resonated in my mind, because I was actually going to follow somebody that could not lie. And I was actually saying, I'm not going because of what my country can do for me, but what can I do for my country? So one of the things happened is that when I went on recruiting duty, I understood something about purpose. I understood something about evidence, and I understood something about benefits. Now, here's what they said for me to do my presentation. Says you're going to join the military, and what you have to understand is that here is what you're going to get, here is the evidence, and here is the benefits. I'm going to tell you that we're going to give you 3 hots and a cot, and we're going to guarantee you a job, and you're going to get paid. And the evidence, and I was well decorated, and I put my hand, and I'm the evidence of it. And the benefits, you get to travel around the world at the military expenses. But then they said you can't tell them that the ultimate job, they may end up going to war. Now, here's why that was important to me, because at 19 and 20 years old, I was a leader in combat in South Vietnam. Nobody ever told me that when I went to the military, that I would end up being in that role as a 19, 20-year-old and in combat and an infantryman at that. So you see my hat, it says Purple Heart. In other words, you have to realize that I was a infantryman in the jungles of Vietnam with the 173rd Airborne Brigade, part of the replacement of Hill 875 and Hill 600, and I was in the Tet Offenses in that war. So whenever somebody talk about Vietnam was a conflict, I'm telling you Vietnam was a war. I don't care how you classify it. Why? People died. Young people. And the emphasis is that I paid close attention. I paid absolute attention to training because it was life or death. This is what a military training must come back to. It's not that you're going to get paid a good paycheck. That's good. It's not that you're going to get to travel all around the world. That's okay. But the bottom line is you need to be well trained, so whenever you have to do whatever you need to do, you need to be prepared. Because when the time comes, you don't have time to be prepared. I remember when we used to have IG inspections. And I used to always tell my people, the platoon, the company, whatever it was, we don't ever work all night for an inspection. We stay prepared all the time, and we just do the necessary thing whenever it's time to go. So if you train according to the mission, and you maintain that, so whenever it's time to go, you literally are ready. Now here's where we go back to George Washington. When we go back to the understanding of George Washington, he had somebody that helped him. Baron von Steuben as Washington Inspector General. So Inspector Generals was those that actually, for the commander, developed what was necessary and the authority. There was little uniformity in terms of qualifications, duty, responsibility, and authority and standards. But von Steuben began working at Valley Forge because what he saw there was a need. Where Washington disheartened troops were then encamped. They was there disheartened. They were not organized. So on 29 March 1779, Steuben regulations for the order of discipline of the troops of the United States appeared. He established that which the military used even now. They actually used it up to like 1972, and I watched it begin to change. And what I did is I literally put in a book to change the discipline that they were leaving from. Here's what it said. George Washington sought diligently to establish the authority and the prestige of the non-commissioned officers. In 1780, he wrote, quote, "It need not be argued that the regularity of the service depend on having sufficient number of good non-commissioned officers," unquote. So he saw that non-commissioned officers was the key to preparation for battle. I listened to a interview yesterday of a retired lieutenant general, which was a special forces guy. And one of the things that was asked the question, one of the last questions was, he asked the lieutenant general, who was your sergeant? And he says, I have several of them. He says, even though I'm retired, I still talk to them every day. He said, well, how do you maintain? He says, I maintain myself by reading books, by actually getting good rest, and eating properly. In other words, what you have to do is, first of all, if you're going to be good at anything, you must maintain your body. If you're going to be good at anything, you need to exercise your mind and you need to learn new knowledge. In other words, you have to understand, if you're going to be a leader, you must lead and not point and literally tell them to go, but you must be willing to be able to lead them. Now, what I said when I was talking about the commander in the book, there's a difference between Moses and Joshua. Moses led them by the hand, but Joshua commanded them. Joshua delegated authority, and Moses wore himself out. Here you go. Now, what I want to do is give you a quote from General Omar N. Bradley, a 5-star general. He actually says, properly led, I will follow anywhere. In other words, he was saying a military organization, if they're properly trained and properly led, they'll follow you anywhere. And he goes on to say, and here's the words. It says, the American soldier is a proud one. And he demands, or she demands, professional competence in its leaders. In battle, he wants to know that the job is going to be done right, with no necessarily unnecessary casualties. The non-commissioned officers, where the chevrons, is supposed to be the best soldier in their platoon, and he is supposed to know how to perform all duties expected of him. The American soldier expects this of his sergeant, to be able to teach him how to do his job. They don't teach themselves. They should be training, and somebody used to be able to teach them. I was an instructor in the 8th Army Military Academy in Korea. And what I did, I had them for 4 weeks when they came. When they came to me, I said, in the first week, I'm going to do everything and you watch me. The next week, I'm going to let you do it and we're going to do it together. The next week, I'm going to watch you do it because the commander's coming in the 4th week. I said, now what you got to realize, in the 4th week, I'm not going to show up till the inspector comes. So you all are on your own. And when you pass, you're going to pass on your own. And when you fail, you'll fail on your own. But I was sure they were properly trained. And we were always number one. So that quote came from General Omar Bradley, a 5-star general. Now, one of the things that happened when I was writing this book, I remember a general that I saw when I went to Sergeant Major's Academy. A sharp general, lieutenant general. He came into the setting and you had to have a secret clearance to even get into the briefing. I saw him on stage and I was so impressed that he was excellent. He was an orator. He looked the part. He sounded the part. And his name was Lieutenant General Julian L. Beckton. So when I got ready to write this book, and I wanted to put his article in the book, I called him on the phone. And I said, General Beckton, I'm getting ready to write a book, and it's called Command Voices, and I want to put an article and a letter that you actually wrote. I want to put it in the book. And he said to me, it's in the public domain, so you can use it. Now, here's part of that letter. And it was to the company level trainers. And he was the commanding general of Trade Out. And he said to the NCOs, set high standards. To the officers, train to your mission. Use your imagination. Develop your non-commissioned officers, NCOs. And he says, to all of you, take care of your troops. That ought to be from the president all the way down, that they echo it, that unless you have motivated people, well-trained, that's taken care of, they won't necessarily do what they do with joy. Nobody goes to joy. Nobody goes to war with joy. They go with apprehensions. So what you got to realize, and he goes on to say, care and concern for soldiers is an important task that is vital to your mission. He goes on to say, soldiers must be able to fight. They will fight more readily for the leader who daily demonstrates his care. So caring for troops motivate them. It's just like when they see you show up, it's a smile on their face because they know you care. It's his care and concern for their welfare, and that is their family. They feel like I'm part of this family, this unit. I feel like we relate to one another. We understand where each one fit. When I was in Vietnam, I was actually in a squad of 8 people. And we called ourselves the Hellcats in the 173rd. But the reason why we did is because these 8 people had each other's back. Now, why was that so unique? It was unique because 4 of them was white, 4 of them was black, and when we went downtown, nobody bothered anybody because we were a team. And when you come into understanding how to function as a team, color has no barrier because everybody must protect everybody's back. So it goes on to says that when we talk about care, daily demonstrate care and concern for their welfare and their family. Unit cohesion, commitment, and loyalty are intangibles that often makes the difference in war. Let me say it again. Even though you may not go to war, you need to be prepared to war, and you need to be so trained that people see you and never want to engage you. So what you do, you prepare for preventing war, but you're prepared in case you have to go to war. The Medal of Honor winner doesn't throw himself on a grenade to protect Washington, D.C. Let me say it again. Because if you ever interview anybody that has a Medal of Valor, they didn't do it for themselves, and they didn't do it for Washington, D.C. Watch this. The Medal of Honor winner doesn't throw himself on a grenade to protect Washington, D.C. He is protecting his buddies. He is protecting the people he cares for and who care about him. You must develop this kind of esprit de corps now, and the purpose to do this, you must purpose to do and care for your people, because training your troops is where we start. So his letter was saying you need strong NCOs, non-commissioned. So they are strong professional non-commissioned officers, and you need a strong professional non-commissioned corps. It is a must, and you must understand that if we're going to become the nation that God is going to use, and he will, they're going to have to care about each other. They're going to have to be command structure, which will shake everything. But then they're going to have to be a structure that have understanding, that know how to retrain them back to function in their mission. And this is why I recommend highly and more than ever that the military is being brought down, but now it has to be brought back up. So I suggest and I say to everybody, there need to be an advisory non-commissioned counselor as a command sergeant major at that level, all the way up to the president, to the vice president, to the secretary of defense, and anybody that is working in those levels, because we are on the road to recovery, and you won't be able to effectively do it if you don't have a strong non-commissioned officers corps that gives wholesome advice, and the whole function is to protect the people and make the commander great. Thank you for your time. Thank you for whatever you're doing. Every person that joins the military must understand one thing. You are an infantryman first. You are a combat soldier. You must know how to function, whether you're in the Army, whether you're in the Navy, whether you're in the Air Force, Coast Guard, or Marine Corps. You can say, "Hoorah, this is the way we do it, the airborne way." I'm so glad that they changed the name of Fort Bragg back to Fort Bragg. That's my heart. Have a good day.